Welcome to the latest episode of the Somerset Storyfest Bookmarked at 7 live streams. Jingari Jimbalong. We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to elders past and present and to the Jarjums, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the cultures and hopes of Aboriginal Australia. We particularly honour and thank the local Yugambeh community upon whose land we meet. Thank you for providing access to this part of your country. Like many local organisations, Storyfest reimagined themselves to launch this digital program, and we're here to share the incredible chapters of stories from our local and wider community. My name is Helena and this is Elliott, and we are both Somerset students and members of the Wordsworths Creative Writing Club. We are very excited to introduce the talented Matt Stanton. He writes and illustrates books for younger children through to middle grade students, such as his best-selling Funny Kids series, and is known for his humorous style and charming illustrations. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Hey guys. Hey Helena and Elliott. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being on.
It's great to be here.
It's good.
Yeah. Start with, could you give a brief description of yourself and your work?
Can I give a brief description of myself and my work? Sure. My name is Matt. I am 36, about to turn 37. I'm married to Beck, and we have 4 kids who are all currently sleeping, and hopefully that stays that way. I'm an author and an illustrator, and so I create books for kids, picture books or like baby books, all the way through to like middle grade chapter books, and yeah, that's what I do. I'm here in my studio here in Sydney, which is in the backyard of my house. It's like a separate building at the back of our house where I work and do YouTube videos and all sorts of stuff. And that's what I do. There's a bunch of books around, but we can talk about specific ones if you want.
Awesome. What's your experience been like this year with COVID-19?
Oh, great question. Weird year, huh? Super strange. Yeah. So look, the kind of day-to-day of making books, that kind of work, which is most of what I do, the kind of sitting down and writing here at my desk, or drawing. I've got like a drawing tablet, which is just on the other side of this camera, on another desk. So kind of the day-to-day work of doing that didn't really change, because that's kind of what I do. I work by myself. I work from home. So that didn't change. Our family life changed a bit, because our eldest, who goes to school, was home from school. And I guess the biggest thing that was different this year were writers' festivals. I was supposed to be with you guys. I was supposed to be at the Somerset Storyfest, and a bunch of other writers' festivals this year. I'd actually decided in 2020 to take a year off school visits anyway, which was kind of poorly timed in the end. But I'll be back doing that next year. And so that didn't change so much, but definitely the kind of travel component of my job disappeared almost completely. The Canberra Writers' Festival managed to kind of still keep themselves going. So I went down to Canberra and did that.
And with that, do you think you've had more time to work on your books because of it? Do you think that more like, can you take almost a positive spin on it? Like
Sure.
I don't know how to put it.
Yeah, no, I know what you're asking. That makes sense. So, I mean, there was a bit of a blessing to it for me in that this year I made my first graphic novel, which is this one, which I'd never done a graphic novel before, and so I'd agreed to do the graphic novel. I'd written the graphic novel. We'd done the cover. We'd announced that it was coming out for Christmas. It's just come out, so it was coming out in November, and but I hadn't finished drawing it yet, and I had never drawn a graphic novel before, so I had no idea how long that takes. Which kind of 200 pages of this takes a while. So that kind of just being bunked down here at home and working away was kind of what I needed in the end to do that. And now I have a better sense of how long it takes because I've got 2 more of those to do in the next 2 years. But I know how long it takes now, so I can plan for it.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, so obviously you write kind of funny, humorous books. So I was just wondering, why do you think humor is like such an effective method of connecting with children?
Great question, Helena. I think humor is a great way to connect anyone. So one of those. If you're ever at a comedy show, or you ever see like live comedy or a comedian, or even if you're watching stand-up comedy with on TV but with other people, that humor has this way of connecting us, I think, because laughter is something we do together. Like so Beck and I do this thing, right, where if something funny comes up in our Facebook feed that we watch by ourselves and laugh, we'll save it because we want to show each other. Because laughing together is always kind of richer. And if you're in a big audience and you're all laughing together at a joke, then there's this kind of shared moment of enjoying the humor together. And the other part of it is humor in and of itself connects us because when someone says something funny, you have this moment. Often you're laughing because you're like, oh, yes, of course. That happens to me too. Or I'm like that. And or I can relate to that experience. I get it. That is funny. And so it kind of connects us. It makes us feel more human. It makes us feel more seen. And I think the best kind of writing does that anyway, regardless of humor. But I think humor has a particular opportunity to do that. And with kids and with students in kind of primary school, which is where, say, my Funny Kids series is pitched, then a lot of the kids that read my books read them when they don't often read a lot. So they're kind of often not so into reading. And Funny Kid kind of effectively the message of Funny Kid is, look, you may not say you like to read, but everyone likes to laugh. So why don't you see if this makes you laugh? Why don't you try this? And we're finding that a lot of kids are getting into reading that way through a series like Funny Kid, where it's the humor that draws us, it's the humor that connects us, and that helps us to grow as readers.
Yeah. So, like writing humor and like trying to write jokes, I imagine it's like quite hard to actually find, what works and what doesn't. So like, how do you go about like finding that? And like, is there any like secret tips you have about writing jokes?
Okay, well, so that's really interesting. That's a super interesting question. I'm terrible at writing jokes. Okay, I can't write jokes. So I was signed up at one point to do a joke book. And then we decided that was a really bad idea for me to do that because jokes are really hard. Okay, I don't write jokes. I cheat. I write stories, like as in even my funny little things that I would write are little stories. I think that kind of the art of joke writing it's still story writing, but it's so succinct. Like you're pulling it right in really, really tight and using kind of as few words as you possibly can. So my kind of secret, if you like, is not to bother. So for instance, say you're wanting to be funnier at school, or you want to kind of come up with more funny stuff. My advice generally is forget jokes. Try to think of funny stories. And funny stories are usually when something surprising happens, right? People ask, I've done a bunch of picture books about farts and stuff like that, right? And people ask me, why do little kids find farts so funny? And that to me, it's not actually got anything to do with the grossness or not. It's to do with the surprise. It's to do with the fact that you weren't expecting something to happen and then something happens. Surprises are funny. And so for me, creating funny stories is about twisting the story. It's about leading the reader down, or the listener down, a certain path, like almost making a trap for them. So they think one thing is going to happen, and then you, instead of zigging, you zag. It's things like that, and I use slapstick humor a lot. Like I try to take the physical kind of humor and put it into words. So I have my characters falling over, running into things, things like that. And then mostly for me in Funny Kid, it's about dialogue. So it's about kind of witty kind of exchanges back and forth, which are nearly always based around conflict. So I'm giving you like a really long rambling answers.
Okay, it's good. These like written comedic scenes, they're almost like, you could say, written comedy skits. They're not so much jokes as they are skits kind of thing.
And I write them as scripts first. So I write in Funny Kid. So like all of these ones. So these are 20 to 25,000 words. But I basically dialogue the whole book first. So I write it like it's a TV script. So just a Max, what he says, Abby, what she says. Because I find that kind of the pace is really important, and I can write really fast if I'm writing kind of back and forth, exactly like a skit, Elliot.
On to the next question. How did you decide to become an author?
I decided really early, or as in like I thought I wanted to write really early. So my mum has a school project I did in grade 2 of a kind of, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I either wanted to be a rock star, a pilot, or an author. And so it's good for everybody that I am neither a rock star nor a pilot. Yeah, I think I've always loved reading, and I always loved stories. I was a bit of a loner, and so when I was quite little, and so books were kind of a helpful place for me to kind of retreat into a little bit, and that changed as I got older. But I had a moment when I was 11 where I wrote the funniest short story that I could. So we had to write a short story in class, and I decided to make it as funny as I could. And I wrote it, and I handed it in to my teacher, and I didn't think anything of it. But a few of the teachers liked it, and they passed it around to each other, and then decided that I should get up at school assembly and read the story to the school, which I was terrified to do. Because I was pretty shy, but I did it, and the experience of reading that story out loud, and seeing an audience reaction, like seeing the readers, like listeners, readers, and seeing the joy that something that had just come out of my imagination could create for somebody else. Was kind of electric. It was a pretty powerful kind of formative experience for me as a kid. So from then on, I was kind of hooked. So I was like, no, this is what I want to do. Then I just had to kind of work out how to make a job out of it, which is a whole other question. But yeah, so kind of early on, and then like when I was 11, I'm like, nah, this is it.
Yeah, I know there are a lot of people who have like there are a lot of people who have written things that are funny, but then they don't take it that extra step. Do you think that everyone has access to almost publicize what they write if they really think it's that good?
Oh, Elliot, you've like stumbled onto my like the writing advice that I like.
I mean, I'm stumbling through my words too. So
no, you're doing great. So I'm going to answer a different question, which is going to line up with your question. So the question I get asked all the time is like, what advice do you have for young writers? In fact, you might even ask me that question. I don't know. You don't have to now. I'm going to answer it. So read a lot, right? 1, write a lot. 2, share it. So I think that's the missing link for a lot of people. I think they write their stories and then they put them in their desk drawer, and then the kind of the idea of taking it out of the desk drawer and letting someone else read it becomes this really big thing, right? And it is terrifying. It's the act of creating anything and putting it into the world is a really vulnerable kind of process. And I feel that every time I publish a book. But if you can kind of, so what we do when we kind of have the story in the desk drawer and we're terrified to bring it out is we're imagining the worst case scenario, right? We're imagining like, I'm going to give this to my friend to read and they're going to hate it. Or it's supposed to be funny, I'm going to give it to them and they're not going to laugh. Okay. And that will feel dreadful and that will feel awful. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it in my desk drawer. Okay. The scenario we don't tend to imagine is the positive scenario, the scenario that actually happens a lot more than we think it will, which is you take it out of your desk drawer, you give it to your friend, they read it, they love it, and they go, oh, this is awesome. Can you write something else? I want to read more. And that, when that happens to you as a writer, is like, it's like being supercharged. It's like, oh, this is the best feeling in the world. So my encouragement to writers is to try to simulate in some way that experience I had as an 11-year-old. The thing that really got me onto writing, got me excited about it, was the experience of being read. And so yes, I mean, depending on how old you are, depending on your access to technology, depending on what your folks are happy with you doing and not doing, if you put a story on a blog or on a social media platform or on a website, you've published it. That's being published. And I would encourage writers to do that in whatever form they can. And if you're younger and that's not really an option, then giving it to someone to read, printing a whole lot of copies of it and folding them and making them into little books and whatever that looks like. But yes, build into part of your process the act of sharing what you're doing.
Yeah, kind of on that, like, what was the process of publishing your first book?
So the first book I had kind of commercially published was There's a Monster Under My Bed Who Farts. I did this with my mate Tim and Tim Miller, and Tim and I made this together, and then we did a whole bunch of kind of art books, bodily function kind of themed picture book after that, and that's kind of how we got started. Now, I said before I knew I wanted to be a writer, but then I had to work out how to make a career out of it. So I kind of got to the end of school. I got to the end of year 12, and I was like, okay, so I want to be a writer, but no one's advertising jobs to come and write novels. So how do you do that? And I tried a whole lot of different directions for a while, but I ended up working in book publishing. So which I did on purpose. So I thought, well, someone decides which books get published and which ones don't. So I'd like to get to know those people and work out how they're making that decision, so that I can understand that a bit better. Now I also drew, right? Like I also draw. So I was kind of interested in design and graphic design. And then I realized something which I couldn't believe had never occurred to me, the amount of time I'd spent in the school library, which was that someone designs the book covers, right? Someone has the job of creating the art that goes on the outside of the book. So I started doing that, and I was able to kind of get a job being a book designer. And so becoming a book designer got me a job in a publishing company, and then I could start to learn, how are they making these decisions? Which books get published, which ones get rejected? When a book gets published, which ones sell a lot and which ones disappear? So I did that, and I worked as a book designer for 13 years while continuing to write by myself at night. And Tim, the guy I did this book with, Tim Miller. So Tim had kind of done a similar thing. Tim worked there. I met Tim working at HarperCollins, and we decided that I was writing an adult thriller. This one, which I self-published this. Okay, this book, nobody's read this book, and nobody needs to. But I had self-published that. Tim was writing like a fantasy novel, and we were both like, hey, we're doing these big serious projects. Maybe we should do something really fun. And so we created this almost just to amuse ourselves, and it did quite well. And so then we kept going.
Mm. On the topic of just drawing the book covers, which do you prefer? Drawing? I know, illustrating or writing?
Illustrating or writing? I don't think I can pick. What I really like is being able to jump back and forth between the two. So I find that it uses quite a different part of my creative brain, and while I love being a writer and I love writing, I find writing exhausting. I find it sometimes like really hard. And so to be able to jump over and draw for a while when the writing's feeling a bit like I'm pulling words one by one out of my body, then the kind of moving to drawing can be helpful. That said, I'll then draw for a while and I'll be on a project where I'm mostly illustrating. So the odd, for example, this the amount of words in this book is kind of pretty light on, really. And the drawing took forever. And so by the end of finishing the odds, like I just want to sit down in front of a blank Word document, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm writing Funny Kid 9 and Funny Kid 10 at the moment, so I'm not drawing at all at the moment.
Yeah. Next question, I think. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you go.
Okay, no, I was just gonna say, like, just on talking about illustration. So, like, how do you kind of decide what to draw, and like, how do you like add this to your storytelling?
Oh, great question. Okay, so let me show you something. In book design school, not that that's a thing, but when you're learning about book design, hang on, sorry, I'm getting a piece of paper. Okay, hang on, piece of paper. So I was once told that this is the worst book cover of all time. Hang on. This is what you should never do in design. Right? So, the book is already called The Apple. Don't put a picture of an apple on it, right? We've got that information already. Give us something else. And so I try to use that lesson in my illustration. Now, it's not always kind of as extreme as that. Obviously, if you've got, I'm writing a scene in Funny Kid and I've got Max and Hugo walking down the street talking to each other, I'm going to illustrate Max and Hugo walking down the street talking to each other. But I might put something into that picture that that isn't in the text, or that in some way adds to the story. So because I do picture books as well, one of the things that you're working on when you're doing picture books, so something more like this, this kind of thing, where I do these books as well. When you're doing picture books, when kids are reading picture books, they're learning visual literacy, right, as well as literacy, as well as word literacy. Someone's going to get me in trouble for saying word literacy. So they're learning to decode visually, right, which is an incredibly important skill and not something that we think a lot about. But actually, we're being visually literate all the time. We're decoding things visually all the time. We're talking to each other. We're looking at each other's facial expressions. That's helping us to understand how comfortable the other person is, kind of what else is going on, what they meant when they said that. Oh, I can see by the way that they're kind of the expression on your face that you mean this, not this, things like that. So in the world of kind of picture books, kids get really, really connected to the visual literacy, and so you've got to kind of you've got to feed that as the illustrator. If you just illustrate what's happening in the words, then you'll end up with a very boring reading experience. The best example I have of this was the second picture book that I did, which actually I don't think I have here. It's the only time I've ever illustrated a book that I wasn't involved in the writing of. So, like, I wasn't involved in the creation of. It's called The Moose is Loose, and it was all about zoo animals on a train going to the zoo, and on the way they escape from the train. They all run around and go crazy, and then they get them back on the train and they go to the zoo. That was effectively the story. And it's a rhyming book by Mark Carthew, really, really beautiful. He's got a really great command of language and rhyme, and it was great. But what wasn't in the text was why the animals got off the train in the first place. And so my job as the illustrator was to draw that story in. So why did the animals want to get off the train? Because the kind of the obvious thing was like, oh, because they want to be free. But then it's like, well, but at the end of the story, they all get back on the train and they go to the zoo. So if they wanted to be free, but they end up back on the train going to the zoo, then the story's a tragedy. And that wasn't the book that Mark was writing. So I concocted a love story between the moose on the train and a distant moose he sees out in the field. And he ends up finding getting out of the train, meeting the other moose, and then smuggling that other moose onto the train to go to the zoo with him. And that story isn't in the text at all. That story is just in the illustration. So you're solving story problems and engaging kind of storytelling very much in the drawing. You can't just draw what the words are.
Yeah. But before this, this is just another question. Before this year, you traveled a lot and spoke at quite a lot of schools.
Yeah.
Do you have anything, any funny anecdotes or anything you've heard or any stories from traveling around?
Funny anecdotes from schools.
Or just any stories or something like that?
What's happened? A few things. It's usually the funny stuff is often in the questions that kids ask. So I get asked all the time how much money I make, which is always fun. I tell you what, I don't talk about this very much. So when you visit a school, at lunchtime you go to the staff room. Okay, that's where the teachers take you when you're visiting. Now, I'd never been in a staff room prior to doing this job because as a student at school, I never went in the staff room. So it was weird. It was like, I'm not supposed to be in here. I'm not. And you know what? They all talk about you. They all talk about you. It's like a big gossip session about different students. And so I usually just kind of sit there in the corner and listen in. It's hilarious because teachers are just like grown-up versions of students. And they all talk and laugh about you. So that's kind of funny. And then there's always a kind of awkward moment around like, does the teacher, do they want you to come to the staff room or not come to the staff room? Do they want to know if you want to come to the staff room? Because I might not want to go to the staff room. And then it's like, oh no, come to the staff room. And then you kind of get in there and everyone's like, all the teachers are like, who's the random guy in the corner? Often the staff room is the funniest, quirkiest. It's a weird place. Don't go there.
Yeah, so next question. So where do you kind of get your inspiration from for all your different kinds of stories that you've written? And like, how do you kind of decide what stories you want to tell?
Oh, great question, Helena. Okay, so inspiration. So the thing that keeps me in. So because I think anybody who spends a lot of time being creative, right? I believe we're all creative, right? So I'm not saying if you're a creative person, because I firmly, deeply believe that we're all creative. But if you're a person who spends a lot of time being creative, then I feel like you tend to get a lot of different ideas all the time. And I think this is kind of the guts of your question is like, how do you filter good ideas from bad ones? How do you work out what to spend time on, what not to spend time on? The grounding thing for me, and sometimes I stray from this and I realize and I kind of have to put myself back to it, is to start with who I'm creating the story for. So that's always the best place for me to start. Is like, who is this story for? Who do I want to create a story for? And then it kind of shifts my headspace because then I stop asking myself the question, oh, what do I feel like writing? Like, what do I want to write? Or kind of what am I in the mood to write? And it focuses me on kind of, well, what would they like to read? Or what do I know about them that inspires me? So I'm trying to really focus my inspiration all the time on the kids that I'm writing books for. And that's why I've really missed not being in schools this year. I took the year off, which I'm going to do anyway, not from writing specials, but from just kind of normal school visits. But as it's turned out, both have disappeared this year, and I've really missed it because it helps me, I think, more than as much as maybe it helps the students that I visit, because it anchors me in who am I creating these stories for.
Just on like different ideas that you think about putting in your books, how many ideas or different topics you want to explore end up making the final cut for your books?
I couldn't tell you how many, but lots. Yeah, so that's interesting. It's interesting working out what the filters are, right? Like, so in terms of like what determines what doesn't make the cut. So one of the filters is kind of like what I was just saying, of that kind of, I think I've lost, I'm making this because I want to make it. Because one of the other great things about focusing on who you're creating the story for is it reduces the likelihood that you're going to be too heavily influenced by another book that you've seen. because if I go, so I want to write a book. I want to write a funny book for kind of middle grade readers. I think I want to write about a treehouse. I think I should write about tree houses. I think I'm going to write a really good story about a treehouse, right? Now, if I'm just thinking about what do I want to write about, I'm like, I've got a great tree outside. I can write a really good treehouse story, all right? But if I'm thinking about who I want to write the book for, like they got plenty of treehouse stories they can read. Which are really very good, by the way. Good job, Andy and Terry. So it kind of focuses you, right? So that's one of the filters is who is this for and is it really serving them? Am I offering them something that they don't already have that they can't get somewhere else? One of the other filters is like, what is particularly with writing a series, although it would work if you were just writing a kind of like with any story, is what is the commitment that I am making to the reader when we've started this? Because reading a book it's a kind of odd relationship for a moment between the author and the reader, because like if you are reading something that I wrote, then like something has literally come out of my head into word form. You're reading it and it's going into your head, and our imagination kind of, you could go into a weird place with this, connecting for a moment, right? So if I write a book called Funny Kid, right? If I write a series called Funny Kid, and you pick it up, then I'm making a kind of promise to you in that moment that I'm going to be working pretty hard to make you laugh. Okay, so if you've picked up a book called Funny Kid Peking Duck, no joke, this book is absolutely quacking, right? And then you open the book and it's a story about cancer, right? Then like I can't do that, right? I've made a kind of commitment to you. I've made a promise to you in the sort of story that I'm writing. So that means that there are plot lines, there are stories, there are things that I could write about, that I would love to write about, that I can't do a Funny Kid book. And I've tried. I tried to write a Funny Kid book about bullying, because I've got thoughts about bullying. I talk to lots of people about bullying. It's a really live and real kind of subject and issue. But I tried to put it into a Funny Kid book and it just didn't feel right, because it's a Funny Kid book, so it has to be kind of jokey. And Funny Kid is a kind of caricature of real life. But if you're dealing with bullying, you need to give it some weight and some kind of gravity, because it's a real thing that lots of kids deal with. So those two things kind of don't go together. So that's kind of one of the filters, right? And so I've got to take my kind of thoughts about bullying, storylines about bullying, and park them over here for a different project, because they don't fit in this one. But I could start a new project. I could start a new story, new series, and make a new promise to readers in which that's completely fine. So it's about kind of understanding what you're creating, understanding the world that you're creating and what you're writing, and then that brings with it filters.
Yeah. So it looks like we've actually got some questions from the audience.
Right.
There's so many different graphic software applications. What software would you recommend for emerging illustrators?
Thanks, Andrea. Great question. So I use the Adobe package. So InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop. I'm in between those three programs all the time. But I'm going to recommend a program which I haven't used, but everyone's raving about it so much it must be good, which is, so a lot of people are talking about Procreate, especially on iPads. And people are talking about that who are kind of like kids and entering the world of illustration, as well as professional illustrators who are with decades worth of experience are also saying this is great. Illustrators are creating whole books in that software. And I think that's a lot more accessible price-wise. Like the kind of Adobe packages are pretty expensive depending on what sort of license you can get and that sort of stuff. So I'm sure Photoshop will come out with an app if they haven't already. Maybe they have. I should get myself sponsored by somebody. But I use Photoshop. That works great for me. But Procreate, people rave about it. Hope that helps.
Here's another question. What comes to you first, plot or characters?
Oh, great question. Thanks, Lily. So plot or characters? Probably character. I think it's character. I think that seems to be a. Sorry, I'm saying probably because I've not really thought about it before. It's I write. Okay, so I write fairly plot-driven stories. So the novels that I've written, I outline them, like I put them in a fair amount of detail. I kind of write in layers, and so I cannot sit down and try and write a novel that I don't know where it's going. Like it just does not work for me. Plenty of writers, that's the only way that it works for them. Everyone's different. Whatever works for you. But the danger of being plot-driven, of being kind of you start with, you outline plot, is that you then create characters that very conveniently fill a role that you've kind of destined them to play because you need them to serve the plot, right? And then you end up with characters that are a bit cardboard cutout-ish. They don't feel real. They feel like, I don't know if that character would say that, but clearly they said that because you needed them to say that. And we've all read books where that's felt like that, or we've watched TV shows or movies where it's felt like that. So for me, the answer to that kind of, the way to get around that pothole is to is to write plot-driven novels that come from characters. So start with a kind of clear idea of the character that I want to create and have them kind of conceived in my head, and then plot based on what that character would or wouldn't do in a given situation. So it's a kind of dance in between the two. But I think in that dance, character comes first. Yeah.
Yep, and we've got another question. Have you had a standout moment in your writing/illustration career?
Oh, thanks, Caitlin. Standout moment. Whoa. Hey, look, when you see your book in a bookshop, it's pretty pinch yourself stuff every time. So there's that for sure. The other kind of standout moments have been writers' festivals actually, and where you get to engage a lot of kids at once. And it kind of brings us all the way back, Helena, to that question you asked early on about humour and connecting us. And I think I had an experience really early on. I was really fortunate actually to be invited to be part of a writers' festival here in Sydney that was in Sydney Town Hall with 2,000 kids in the room, and it was kind of electric. You just felt like if you can make that room laugh, then it just came alive. So there's kind of writers' festival moments where you feel like you're getting to meet a lot of these kids and connect with them and laugh with them and just enter into their world. And I find that really, really, really cool. Yeah.
Okay, I think this is going to have to be the last audience question, but here it is.
Okay.
When you wrote the series This Is a Ball and The Red Book, I usually twitch when I see the cover graphics. How did this series come about?
Andrea, I don't know if twitching is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, great question. So those books, for those who don't know, this is the one. This is the most twitchy one. Beck and I married, and we did this series as 5 in the series together. They've just released it actually as one book with all 5 in the one kind of edition. So they're read aloud picture books, and and they're designed to mess with the minds of small children. So this came from a game, and actually all of the books are kind of based on kind of word games or games that we would play, not so much with our kids, or a little bit with our kids. This book was based on a game that we played with our goddaughter because it was before we had kids. And the game was, I would see Jasmine, she would be she was kind of 3 or 4. She would be wearing a t-shirt with a cat on it. And I'd say, "Hi, Jazz, nice to see you. I love your t-shirt. That's a really cute dog." And if you do that to a young kid, they have this really kind of cool experience where they get both kind of happy and angry at the same time. So they get angry because they're like, "No, that's wrong. Like, you said the wrong thing. This is I can't remember what I said now. This is a cat. You said dog. This is a cat," right? But they also find it quite funny, and they feel kind of empowered because in their world, adults are always right and they're always wrong, right? But when you do that and they know they're right, then they feel kind of really empowered and they find it quite funny. And you can play the game for ages. You can be like, no, Jazz, that's clearly a cat. I can't remember what I said. That's clearly a dog because it has 2 ears, and all dogs have 2 ears. It's like, no, it's a cat. Cats have 2 ears too. And so what we did with this series is we thought, could you take a game like that and put it in book form? Could you kind of basically write the script for the adult, that if they basically just read the words, then the child brings the game. So the stories that happen in those books happen outside the book. They happen in the reading experience, in the kind of the interaction between an adult or an older sibling and a younger child. So there's a bunch of they're kind of their games that we've played, and they're all so this is the ball is kind of, you end up having conversations about perception, right? Like, why is that not a ball? Why is that a box? There's other ones. There's the red book, which is purple. Is all about persuasion, right? The child has to work out how to convince you that it's red, that it's purple, not red. The book that never ends is basically a maze. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure within a picture book. And so, so that's what they are. They're concept read aloud books, and they were really deceptively difficult to make. They look insanely simple, and they were really hard.
Well, I think we might have to wrap it up now. So, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way they could do that?
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email. So Facebook, Matt Stanton, author. Instagram, good question. It's Matt Stanton here is my handle, I think. If you search me, or YouTube, if you search me, you'll find me. And then if you go to mattstanton.net, you can email me from there. If you've got any of the Funny Kid books, my email address is just in the back of the book. So so feel free to get in touch and say hi.
And pretty sure all of those contact details will be in the comments section. If you're tuning in and you want to contact Matt, that's the best way to do it.
Great.
On that note, I do believe we need to wrap it up. So thanks so much for appearing on the show, Matt. We'll give you the book. We'll leave the bookmark there. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at Somerset Storyfest to keep up to date on what we're doing. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.